So we've got a bunch of Loudon partners that are helping us through this, including Loudon Soil and Water, Loudon Wildlife Conservancy, Piedmont Environmental Council, Plant Nova Natives, and the Master Naturalist chapter out of Banshee Reeks out of Loudon, and others as well. We're working with the Stormwater Department. You'll certainly get information from the urban foresters. This is going to be really a comprehensive program to bring you a bunch of resources. So thanks to all of our partners. So some of you have been in some of our info sessions, and some of you have seen other presentations that I've done. So some of these might be repeats, but I'm not going to belabor the points, but we'll go into just why community associations. So as we think about Loudoun County specifically, there's lots of things happening on our lands. And you can see this map from Piedmont Environmental Council about the kinds of property and the policies that apply to different lands throughout Loudoun County. So the way development happens on private property in the urban areas versus the suburban versus the transition and rural areas are all different. I won't go into details here. Piedmont Environmental Council is a great resource for things like land use policy, but land use policy affects our environment. We all know that, I think. If we don't know that, you'll know that by the end of this presentation. And so as you think about where you live and where your community is, you might have different pressures from the outside world that you might be looking to mitigate. And so as we think about HOAs, we think about them because they're really big and powerful. Some are as big as small public works departments, not all. You know, we hear some are 100-person HOAs. I think we have somebody from our info sessions that came out where just a couple dozen. But even that is at a bigger scale than just an individual homeowner. And so that big scale means big environmental impact, positive or negative. And so it's a really good opportunity to partner with our locales and really think about how we as people interact in the world at this broader scale. And the other great thing about HOAs and community condo associations are that they're managed by people in the community. So the people who live there are the people who make decisions for what happens in that property. So that's great, just like you guys and the people that you know on your boards and committees. And also, you can, at the big scale, be leaders in terms of what's happening at your HOA or condo association to really help inspire people to do that individually in their own yards and to see how possible it is. It can happen the other way around too, but it's nice when it happens both ways. So another thing I like to think about for this program is to think about Loudoun and your watersheds. Your watersheds are where all of the water that falls on the ground goes. And this is all based on the topography of the ground. There are 17 major watersheds in the Loudoun County area. And just as of May 2019, there's been a new pumping station. So as you think about where your drinking water comes from, it's now significantly coming actually from the Potomac. So there are some watersheds where whatever happens on the land goes into the water. It's going to be going into the drinking water from the Potomac. And that water is now pumped down 6 miles to this new treatment facility, which is pretty interesting reading about that. And water from Loudoun, as you can see, it spills outside of Loudoun County. Watersheds don't really care about state boundaries or county boundaries. And in this case, it goes into adjacent locales. So things that happen on Loudoun County land will affect the drinking water for other people. Just like upstream from Loudoun County, what happens on that land will affect the drinking water for Loudoun. We are all part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And this is, I think it's a 500-mile stretch of a watershed. It is the largest estuary in North America and the 3rd largest in the world. It's a really special place. And so as we think about the environment and water quality, the Chesapeake Bay is a really big thing in our area. And we'll learn about more about that from the stormwater guys in a December 3rd workshop. As you think about the water cycle, in a really healthy natural environment, this is what happens. Rain comes down, a lot of it goes into the ground, recharges this underground water system. Some of it runs off into streams, and a lot of it goes back up into the air as well. That changes significantly once we alter what happens on the land. And that's really important because they're all really intimately connected. All of these trees, natural vegetation, they prevent erosion, they trap and filter and slow and clean the water. And when we get rid of that, the system changes. So whatever's on the land is in the water. And that's really important to think about because, again, HOAs can affect this at a really big scale. So when you think about the clean water that we have to drink, we have to protect the land in order to get that. So when you think about this picture of a little girl drinking out of that water, where does that water come from? It comes from the water that runs across our lawns, across our parks. So whatever is in the water really is in us. And that's really a key component to thinking about ecology. So what conservation issues do community associations face? This is not going to be the complete list of all of them, but it is going to be a sampling of them. So the way your community was probably designed has a lot to do with what its current ecology looks like. Oftentimes builders, they design the covenants, for the purposes for what they were thinking about in the community. When construction is taking place, they can spread it out over large areas and just put grass over it. That's a really cheap way to get a development up and running. And landscapers in general tend towards non-native and often invasive plants. So lots of stock from massive landscaping suppliers. We can talk a little bit about why invasive plants are frequently chosen to be picked for landscaping. But one hint is if they're invasive, they grow really easily. And things that grow really easily are really resilient oftentimes. And so they can often be marketed as positive. And then now, some of the communities we heard today, some are newer in the past couple of years, but some are older as well. And sometimes older communities, this problem of invasive plants really can make what were natural areas look a lot messier now, and obviously be impacting the ecology there as well. So now we think about the societal factors as well. We like, as a society in general in America, big mowed lawns. You'll see this everywhere. That clean landscape is an aesthetic that is part of our culture. And it's something that through this program is a component of things we might want to change. When developments are put in, things are cleared, ecology is cleared, and plain lawns are often the first easiest place to start. And so you end up with a barren landscape like you see here. And in order to keep those lawns healthy, like you see this sign here, chemicals being applied today. When I stopped and saw this sign on the way to a meeting a couple of years back, I laughed that go to that board meeting and talk about why chemicals are being applied. Is funny, two signs together, but chemicals are part of maintaining that clean landscape. And then as we think about our tree canopy, how do we take care of our trees? Oftentimes we get rid of trees that are dying because they don't fit that clean aesthetic, but are they replaced? Could they be kept around if they were in a more natural setting to be part of our ecology? How do we take care of our trees that we put in our landscape? Have the landscape builders that put the community in, put the crepe myrtles only halfway in the ground so that you have these massive root balls sticking out? Or do we get trees planted properly in the ground with the right kind of mulching? We torture our trees a lot, it seems. And then even in our more natural areas and our tree canopy, what's happened to those with invasive plants over time? Have we neglected our natural areas? One of the most interesting things I've learned about invasive plants are that not only are they commonly used as landscaping plants, but there's actually a law in the books in Virginia that a noxious weed is any plant that's detrimental except for when it's commercially viable. That's a real problem. And it's a problem as we think about where we source plants from our landscapers and what they're choosing to use in our landscapes as well. So there's a real profit motivation here to ignore the ecological impacts of the things that we typically choose for our landscaping. And then erosion is an increasingly challenging problem, compounded by usage of our common areas and really hard rainstorms that are happening as the climate changes. So how do we deal with that waterfall? You might have areas in your community where there's lots of sitting water. And this is coming from things like the amazing increase in impervious surface. Some of you might have seen this slide before. This is 25 years of change in the Metro DC area. It doesn't include Loudoun, but it's happening everywhere. And you can just see the difference in impervious surface in just 25 years. And this data is 10 years old at this point. what happens when that water comes down is it hits all those impervious surfaces, roofs, sidewalks, roads, and it rushes across our lawns into our streams. And when you think about what a rainstorm really means, this was really shocking to me. A 1-inch rainstorm, frankly, if I see 1 inch on the weather forecast, I feel relieved because we've been getting 2, 3, 4-inch rainstorms, which are crazy. So you might think, well, it's great. You could have a rain barrel in your yard. You could capture all that water and use it later when it's drier. But a 1-inch rainstorm on 1,000 square foot roof actually drops about 623 gallons of water on that roof's surface. So you can just imagine what that means, how many water barrels you would need to fill to actually just catch 1 inch of rain. And that's why homeowners associations and condo associations with common property can really be a component of thinking on this bigger scale of how we deal with impacts like water. And where does all that water end up? It ends up in our local stream valleys where sediment erodes away and you have dangerous chasms in there. And then the localities want to come in and do stream restorations, which can be quite invasive, take a lot of trees out. It can be good in the long term, but are short term pretty impactful to the common natural areas. And they're also really expensive. 1 linear foot of a stream restoration was quoted to me last year from Fairfax County as costing about $1,200. Those are things that your tax dollars will have to go to. So we're all really collectively paying for these impacts. And obviously the downstream water impacts to the Chesapeake Bay are severe as well. And as we think about what that water all takes with it, we talked about all that water, all the things in water being in us. This is all things that get into our water. Salt from our roads, which is not easily taken out of water. Fertilizers we put down, the waste from our pets, trash, leaves, any kind of oil, and even temperature here is on here, because if you think about on a really hot summer day, water rushing across a really hot parking lot, that rushes right into our stream beds and oftentimes kills a lot of the life that's living in the stream just from the temperature changes. So it's really interesting to think about water in our ecology for sure. So that's just an overview of watersheds, the ecological impacts. We talked in some of our info sessions too about the ecology of supporting birds and butterflies and bees, and that's all the components too. We'll absolutely cover that some more as well. So to dive into the actual Greening of Your Neighborhood program, the whole point of this program is to bridge the gap between long-term successes, the gap that happens to get long-term success. So I mentioned this in our intro slides, but I don't know how many of you have read Bringing Nature Home. We can talk about that in the Q&A. It's a great book. If you haven't read it, absolutely add it to your library list. But maybe you've gotten inspiration from any one of the different things we talked about today. We're going to point you to more places for inspiration as well. So don't worry about that if you haven't read those things. But you have inspiration on one side, and there's funding potentially on other sides, either whether that's from grants from Soil and Water or other organizations, or from your HOA directly, or from just manpower from your volunteers. We'll help you get ideas for funding. But there's this big gap in between, and it's advocacy. We can help with the other two sides to get you the resources you need, but you can be a primary driver of what advocacy means. You need to be thinking about your boards. And the little triangle there represents change, because your boards change. Your boards aren't going to be the same forever. So you really need to think about long-term success as they transition. The committees that you have, the residents that live in that, what are their community needs and wants? And how do you engage that broader population in making sure the project that you have in mind or that you eventually get to really has that long-term success component? So I think about this, and we have on-site managers here today too, so I apologize for not having you in a circle, but I think of you more like the board since you do work for them. But there are these three components. I think of it like a Venn diagram. If you and the board talk, you have a solution that you guys are really excited about, but you've left out the community. Same way if the community and board think about something, same way if you and the community think about something. But really the strength comes from when everyone is talking, swapping ideas, and really getting something that everyone is excited about at a broader scale. So that is the center that we're all looking for in terms of this Greening Your Neighborhood program. So we think about the timeline. We are in November now. We're going to have our first workshop in December, and I'll be getting you all some information on our self-guided tour, which we're pulling together the details for now. So the first workshop is going to be advocacy workshop from me, followed by an example of ecological projects from River Creek HOA and how they worked with soil and water to get those projects to be completed and an ongoing success. And then we'll also hear from Loudoun Stormwater about how they can also help HOAs at the watershed scale. And so some of those areas will be on our in-person tour, and some of those areas that we'll talk about in the December workshop will also be on the self-guided tour. And the self-guided tour is meant so that you can go see on the ground projects, some in HOAs, some not. They'll cost different things, but at least they'll give you ideas about what they look like in the winter. And then we'll go out and see them again in May of next year in person when they're in more of their glory and blooming. But it's always really helpful to see green infrastructure in its dormant winter months. So then next year, we'll have a second workshop, and we're pulling together the details there, but a lot of that's going to focus on where everybody is on their projects and collaboration and information sharing, and also bringing more resources to the table there as well. And then, like I mentioned, the in-person tour in May. And then you can complete your project in any time frame that you can, but that's what the end of the project is for. All of this time, throughout this entire program, even though we're going to have this little bit of programming, they'll be in person like this, we're also going to do a lot of other things. So the first really big component that you'll need to do for this program is, if possible, find a partner. Some of you have partners today on the phone. That's fantastic. Some might be joining in future orientation sessions. But doing this with more than one person can be a real benefit. So reach out and see who you can engage to find that partner, especially if anything might happen in this year and a half that you might need to transition leadership to somebody else. It'll be helpful to have a tag team partner. And then all of these other things are things that you'll be doing. Working with your board, engaging residents, figuring out what kind of alliances you can build, brainstorming those ideas through all those conversations, helping to build an action plan, which might be very iterative. You might have a solid idea now, but that might change over time, and that's okay. Strategizing how you get there through the research that you're doing, contact all the resources that you might need, figure out your funding, organize, and then eventually complete your project. So these are the things that I'll be relying on you for taking the lead on, but we're going to help you get there too, and to help remind you where you're supposed to be. We're going to get you an advocacy handbook for the December meeting, and also an action plan outline. We'll get a list of resources to you, so you don't have to be scrambling, taking notes during the December session, at least not on the resources side, just more on the brainstorming for your own side. And then we'll be doing monthly emails with stories and tips and surveys to you every other month to gauge progress, just to see where you are and to know, make sure we're staying in touch about that. And then we'll just continue those emails through the end of the program as well. And then also, we're looking to give an additional 10 hours of mentoring to 5 communities. And we'll talk about that more at the December meeting. But that's something too, that if you think you'll need extra work and you're really ready to hit the ground running on this, that you'll be able to put in an application for that, an easy application for this program to get extra help. So between now and December 3rd, it's going to be Thanksgiving. So first of all, I hope everyone is going to stay safe and have nice plans for what will absolutely, I'm sure, be a weird holiday this year with our health pandemic. But in the meantime, I really want you to get inspired. If you haven't heard Ptolemy, and I'll drop this information into the chat box after I am done sharing my screen, watch this 10-minute interview. It's from a Texas station. I also have an NPR interview that's 25 minutes long. I'll drop both links in. If you haven't heard Ptolemy, or you haven't heard him in a while, he's great. He speaks better than I ever could about these issues, and he'll talk a lot about that integrated ecology side of things. Another really nice book is Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. If you haven't read it, it's really wonderful. It's a great way. It's more like a diary. Bringing nature home is real tactical information about how to get started, and real detailed. It's half a resource guide. It's wonderful. But Sand County Almanac is more really just stories about how amazing ecology is, and it's from quite a long time ago. So you'll see that not much has changed, unfortunately, which you guys are helped to be a part of to drive that positive change. Reach out to your board members to find out when your next board meeting is. Get that on your calendar and start those conversations as early as possible with your board members and committee members about what the top issues are for the coming year in the community. Get to know what those are so that you can see how your ideas might dovetail or how there might be other ideas. And then, like I mentioned about finding a partner, reach out to residents, tell them about this program, invite them to join you as a partner, or just get them engaged in it so that you start building that alliance early. So these are your things that you can start thinking about over the next couple of weeks. It's easy homework for sure. And that's an intro to the Greening Your Neighborhood project. So